So, hi, Mr. Unschild. Thank you
What's your
for making some time.
Yes, say Paul.
Okay, thank you, Paul. We just heard you talk about your new book, The Fall and Rise of China, if I rephrase
The
it
Fall
correctly.
and Rise of China, Healing the Trauma of History.
Yeah.
The subtitle is most important.
Why write as
As a medical historian and translator of ancient Chinese texts,
why write a book like that?
because for the past 45 years, I've translated books from, the past 2,000 years of Chinese medicine. And of course, the main point in medicine is how to prevent, how to heal, how to mitigate suffering, bodily suffering, mental suffering. And one of the key terms in Chinese medicine is zhi, which means to cure. But then, of course, it also means to govern, to rule. Zhi shen, to cure a body, is the same as zhi guo, to cure or to rule a country. So what really occurred to me at one point was that when I looked at how China was traumatized in the 19th and early 20th century, first by European powers, England, France, by United States, by Russia, and eventually, and I think most traumatizing for China, by Japan, its small quote-unquote neighbor. And I realized that China overcame these traumata in a unique way. It was traumatized and reacted, but it didn't react with emotions. It reacted with reason. And that's very difficult. If someone kicks you into your stomach, I mean, you have every right to be angry. And the Chinese were kicked into their stomach and everywhere for decades, and they lost political sovereignty, they lost territory. And still, I mean, there are individuals in China, of course, who created emotional aversion to the West, but the collective mentality, and I distinguish between individual mentality and collective mentality. The collective mentality that won over everybody else, or over everything else, and one certainly over emotions, was, if they can do this to us, they must have something that we do not have. So let's analyze our weakness. Let's not look at them as bad guys. Let's look at them as guys who have something and they pursue their interests. And this allows them to enter us and to do to us what they've done. But how can they do it? And why can't we defend ourselves? We are an ancient civilization. We have had wonderful technical, scientific inventions. We have a perfect medicine. Why can they do this? And this seems so easy, but it is so difficult. You just have to look at another region in the world, closer to Europe, that feels humiliated, feels, overcome by Western values, and how do they react? With emotion, hate, terrorism. The Chinese would have had every reason to blow up the world towers in the United States, but that's not their way, not their collective way, maybe individuals. They looked at these world towers and they say, if they can build them, and we not, they must have something we don't have. Let's learn it, and 100 years from now, the world towers are ours. And that's exactly where we are. And the interesting thing, and this is what I described in this book, and that's why it's called Healing the Trauma of History. In the first half of this book, I enumerate and give the necessary historical background of the 9 traumata which I identified between the first Opium War and eventually the Japanese invasion in the early 20th century. These were 9 traumata, and all these 9 traumata exist still in the soul and mentality and hearts of the Chinese. Yeah? And these traumata were overcome. And the second half of this book details the steps of China coming back to the status it enjoys today, being feared, being considered an equal, world player by the United States, and having to fear nobody. Certainly no one would dare today to encroach upon China as they did in the 19th and early 20th century. And they have made good almost all of their territorial losses except for Russia, which still holds so much of Western China, which belonged to China earlier in the 18th and early 19th century. And now, after, this is not easy. How to kind of steer such a huge country with such a heterogeneous cultural background and population. China really is a multicultural society, even though we always love to speak of Chinese culture, but there are many different cultures within China. So to steer such a country to where it is now. And in the second half of this book, I distinguish between 5 steps. The first step was, of course, okay, we buy German arms and then we are strong enough to overcome and resist against Japan. Wrong again. The second step was, okay, we have to send out people to learn from the West, from Europe, from the States, from everywhere. That was fine. That laid the basis. Then, of course, the anti-Japanese war, and then, of course, the beginnings of Chinese People's Republic and some errors and some radical solutions which were thought to be helpful, like the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution. All that created a long gap in this kind of recovery until eventually in the 1970s reason began to dominate again, and then of course a series of most clever thought of strategies, to bridge the centuries-long gap of technological advances in the West to, technological backwardness of China. Most ingenious strategies were developed, like this joint venture business, etc., kind of generating or giving the population freedom to accumulate riches, to accumulate capital, etc., etc. And here comes another thing. The book tells not only of the different natural science the Chinese brought, in contrast to our analytical science, their relationist science, which helps them today to be much better than we are in digitalization, because digitalization is web thinking. Yeah, and we still hold on to analytical thinking. Yeah, and maybe this is an advantage for the Chinese to still have that web thinking of yin yang and 5 phases in their mind. Yeah? And the other thing is, of course, that in the West we are taught to deal with ideologies as dogmas. A dogma is something you identify with. You are either Catholic or Protestant, or you are Christian, or you are Islamic, or you are capitalist, or you are communist, whatever. We find it very difficult since Aristotle to combine 2 ideologies that mutually contradict each other, within one mind. And this is why we don't understand China. On the one hand, they still have Marxism, and Mao is thought, at the head of many programs, and on the other hand, they are even more capitalist today than many Western countries have ever been. But this is simply because they do not consider ideologies as dogmata, but as tools. And you use a tool whenever it is asked for. And you do not throw away the axe because the spade was discovered. One is good for this purpose and another is good for this purpose. And this is very, very difficult for us who have, been raised in a normal Western environment. So the book The Fall and Rise of China really helps you to understand what we consider contradictions in Chinese attitudes, in Chinese politics, it is really, I think, the very first explanation of a process, a recovery that is unique in world history. That is that a very old and culturally rich civilization that has been really brought down by an intruding culture, and then 100 years later has re-emerged as a respected and powerful member of world society. So I guess that's Fall and Rise of China, Healing the Trauma of History, which now is available, as I said, in English, in Italian, in Greek, and in German.
You mentioned that the book is published by in America as well.
In America, it's distributed by Chicago University Press.
Yeah, I will put some footage in this video that people can order with 40% discount as well.
The 40% discount applies only to University of California Press books.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, but Fall and Rise of China is so cheap.
Yeah.
It's a small paperback.
Okay, it's easy to. And to come to these realizations of what's happening, what do you see for the field of TCM as the future, as what can be possible to unfold?
That's very difficult to say, because again, the Chinese authorities, let's say, they are interested in establishing China again as a world player, not only in politics, in the military, in economics, but also culturally. And from the outside, it is very difficult to see whether the support for Chinese medicine is because Chinese medicine is a winner worldwide and one of the very few items with a positive image of China. I mean, you have Chinese porcelain, you have Chinese tea, but there are also so many negative news about China in Western media, and Chinese medicine is a real asset with a 100% positive image. So why do the Chinese authorities push, worldwide distribution of Chinese medicine? Is it because Chinese medicine throws a positive light on Chinese culture, or is it because they really believe Chinese medicine is a worthwhile addition to world health? This is very difficult to decide from the outside.
Yeah.
But certainly they have every reason, and they do so, to push the spread of Chinese medicine, and there are very, very many activities, like all Confucius Institutes now have been ordered to propagate Chinese medicine worldwide, and there are lots of international activities aimed at establishing Chinese medicine in legislation and in the curricula of teaching hospitals, etc. So it will definitely spread and will definitely enjoy a greater reputation and a greater dissemination in future years.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much for your time and your effort. We will buy the book and read it to get more understanding of where China comes from and probably also will be heading.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Okay.